What's that? Okay. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership, the new mothership at coalitionradionetwork.com. Of course, coalitionradio.us has 7 years of shows, 7 years, including an interview that we highlighted this past week with attorney Robert Mann, for whom our thoughts and our prayers, our actual prayers, are in place as he attempts to recover from the dread COVID-19. We're going to immerse ourselves now for the next hour and 45 minutes or so, I should say, in local politics. Being a political activist for a number of years in here in Rhode Island, I've had the opportunity to sit and meet with leaders of virtually every background. And as someone who I've become friends with and I've seen to be a force for good in Rhode Island is joining us for the very first time tonight. Paul Archetto has been active in Cranston city politics really for a good part of his life. He's a member of the community. He teaches locally at CCRI. He has been a council person. He has been intimately involved in the school committee. And it is my great pleasure to introduce him for the very first time on the airwaves of the Coalition Talk Radio. Welcome to the Coalition.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
No, it's great to have you finally on the air. Paul, you've always been a guy who's worked, I think, fairly quietly in the background and as a force for good. You're not the type to be flamboyant. You're not the guy who's got to lead. You're not inserting yourself into every picture. We where I come from, we call candidates like that live shots. The minute the red dot comes on the camera, then all of a sudden, magically, they appear using hockey checking skills that had to have come out of the NHL to get. And
they usually flashes. They usually flashes in the pan. You know, I'm long and consistent. Thank you for the accolades. I also was a state representative for 6 years. Back when, if you remember, DEPCO, I was elected, and the governor at the time closed 46 credit unions. It was a very difficult time, as it is right now. I mean, $800 million deficit and rising looks like a bleak future, and the governor and the assembly is going to have to make some very hard choices.
Right, as are cities and towns, which is why, well, ironically, the last election and currently the election coming up at the city and town level is so important. It's my personal opinion that, quite frankly, the decisions have to be made at the town level. Ultimately, towns know their operations intimately. They know their community. They know where, they might be able to save a little money. They know where they're stretching it thin. I don't think you can have this constant, if you will, this attempt to control the state at this high level and expect the towns to just follow in line without any consideration to their own efforts. But let's talk about your experience, because it is, I'm looking at your resume here, and it is one of the most varied that I've seen in someone who's a state activist. You did serve as a member of the General Assembly from 1990 to 96. You got very high ratings from Common Cause of RI at a time, I believe, when Phil West was steering the ship, the Honorable Reverend Phil West.
Good man, Phil West. Yes, got to be good friends with him.
Right.
Continue.
Operation Clean Government. Now, this is one of the maddening parts of activism in the state. Operation Clean Government, in its time, in its heyday, basically changed the course of Rhode Island government and was able to least stem the tide. A lot of very good people. The question, when you look back in Rhode Island history, you and I have got a lot of institutional experience. We got a lot of memories. We know where the names are. And you look at an organization like that, and you say, well, "Boy, could we use them now?" Because they were so selfless. They were not interested in spotlights, and they were not interested in causes, led by their name. There was a lot of good people.
They gave you a lot of accurate statistical data. Unlike when you're elected official, and you have these, seminars, you have these promotions, the men's with the board, guys with the board, and a lot of their numbers are skewed because they want to get their project through. So Common Cause and Operation Clean Government always gave you pretty accurate assessment of what the project cost or what was going on. That's what I respected the most about them.
Now, let's talk about the DEPCO period, because there was we were about to go through another DEPCO. In fact, it may even make DEPCO look, I don't want to say insignificant, because they were troubling times. Tell folks about what happened there. Give them a little bit of a history.
Well, there was a credit union that Mr. Malacone was operating, that he constantly was lending money with no auditing. No, he wasn't writing down the loans. There was no accounting of the loans. And then the credit unions had their own RISDIC insurance. They weren't FDIC. And there was a run on his bank, so he drew on the insurance. Then the depositors began to withdraw large sums of money. So most of the credit unions, their liquidity was dried up. They had no credit. So they had to close. Someone made the good choice. He closed them. And fortunately, many of the depositors got 100% of their deposits back, except for their interest. They did not receive any interest on their savings accounts, which was a win, because initially they were only going to get 25%. They didn't want the 50%, and then this assembly decided we should reimburse them in full, but at a cost, because there was a long-term debt involved in that, as you're well aware.
Right, and you had the escalation of the sales tax to this day, which was in line pretty much with the state of Massachusetts. Now, of course, it's at its own peak, and they've never gotten around to reversing that, which has led to another conversation someday about the cynicism of the average Rhode Island taxpayer.
Good point. And then while paying that off, down the road, I think it was finally in '96, the Convention Center Authority, the bill that the Convention Center, which I opposed because I felt our long-term debt was so severe. By voting against that, specials just came out, and I was defeated in the next election. But right now, we're in the same scenario with the debt we have, and I understand that the Convention Center is being converted into a hospital. Am I correct at this time?
They're using it as some type of temporary hospital facility at an exorbitant cost, which is
right.
ludicrous.
When there's a closed hospital in Pawtucket, from my understanding,
yes,
something that's really accessible, it's there, it's ready to go, and for some unknown reason that stays closed, and we're spending millions to convert the convention center to a hospital. So it's kind of, I question that decision. Well, I'll tell you.
Well, no, it's clearly the old line is never let a good crisis go to waste, and there are a lot of folks who are using what is actually a life and death crisis. I firmly believe that this is not some imagined disease like some folks.
No, I agree. It's a serious situation. You're absolutely right. Yep.
But at the same time, folks are taking that and running with it. And, to their credit, there was a group of Republican insurgents a couple of years ago who did a really in-depth analysis of a working group that did an in-depth analysis of the operations of the convention center. And, lo and behold, it's hemorrhaging cash. And I go back, that was one of the seeds of my activism was the convention center. And I think you remember as well that it first started out as a project that was going to make money. And then, lo and behold, it wasn't going to really make much money, but it would bring business in. And then I'll never forget, I was watching, I think it was 10 News Conference or whatever the equivalent of it was at that time, in a late-night rerun. And one of the wise men of the state of Rhode Island said, well, it was never really intended to make money. It's a lost leader that will generate income for the state. And, it's a beautiful building, but obviously it's hemorrhaging cash. And White
elephant.
Absolutely. And I mean, is it fair to say at this point in time, given the historical deprivations that we are facing financially as a state, is it time to take all the sacred cows off the table? Shouldn't everything be at stake? Everything be up for conversation now?
Most definitely. Well, the taxpayers are going to suffer heavily if that's not the case. Everything should be on the table. You're absolutely right.
There are no more sacred cows. They have to stop. So it's interesting as a backdrop that you experience up here. Now, for folks who weren't around then or might be too young to remember, you literally had the prospect of dozens of banks closing New Year's Day. You had businesses that no longer had access to their money. Everything was locked down overnight. And it was the first order of a newly elected, newly sworn in Governor Sondland. Reflect, because it's interesting. I never believe in coincidences, and this is certainly not one, because the feeling in the state that day, I want you to describe to people, because it is quite frankly the feeling that we're about to encounter once it becomes obvious what our challenges are.
Definitely. I can remember mass protests at the State House, and you're talking thousands of people with signs wanting their money, and just we weren't ready. We had nothing set up at that time, and it was very difficult. They walked through the halls of the State House. It was not easy to be an elected official at that time, and we rode the wave. We got through it, and they got reimbursed. So, but it wasn't easy. And you're right. If recovery doesn't come or comes too slowly, I'm sure they'll have the same massive protests again.
I mean, businesses were closed. People lost their life savings for a serious amount of time. People took their own lives. There were a number of deaths that were accelerated or, if you will, pointed out as a cause of early deaths of folks. It was as if the world had stopped overnight, except the rest of the world was going on because they still had their mortgage bills, they still had their utility bills, and they had literally no recourse. And I fear that's what we're about to face now. Now, after I believe my reading of history, you were unfairly targeted in that next election. It wasn't good enough. You could have I think sat on your laurels at that point. You'd given a lot to the community, but you did actually a couple of years later. You did run for Cranston School Committee and were elected for 4 years. Talk about the Cranston school system. This is an area that you're intimately involved in.
Well, as an educator, I want to provide the best access to education that a student can have. And my approach is always to give them what they need as far as computers, whatever assets they need. However, if we can downsize and we can reduce the number of buildings, you're saving on the heating, you're saving on the upgrade or repairing of roofs and windows. So, in that tenure from 2004 to 2008, I was instrumental in closing Horton School here. It's on Park Avenue. It's a small elementary school, which saved quite a bit of money, and we were able to take that money, reinvest it, spread it around, and buy upgraded, the best computers and tech equipment good for the kids. And then again, in this term, when I was elected in 2018. We advocated to close another small elementary school, which is Chester Barrows in Edgewood, which saved the community about $550,000. So my approach has been give the kids what they need as far as everything they need, but try to downsize with buildings and with staff if you can, with secretaries, things of that nature. And but you can only do that for so long, Pat, because you can only trim that bone for so long, and then you're at the bone, So that's the approach we're taking at this point. So the next step could be possibly regionalization. If our 39 municipalities can get together and perhaps have 4 or 5 school districts, you would save on administrative costs, vice principals, personnel directors, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where the schools are top heavy with administrators.
And this becomes critical because we've now seen, And I believe in a throwback in a movement that became during the Carter administration, we've seen mega growth in middle level to higher level management at school systems, which can be directly correlated, sadly, with declining test scores. It seems like all the money is being spent on consultants, management, more management, and public relations. Now, I'm painting with a very broad brush, but what's happened in the Providence schools is now a national story, and it's emblematic of what's happening to a varying degrees at schools across the state as they continue to perform poorly. What are your thoughts on regionalization? Do you think that it could be the answer in terms of education for the state?
It would help. I think it would help with the cost, because take Cranston for example. I mean, I only know the budget when I was it, but I can speculate. I think the budget for Cranston now must be close to $200 million. I think when I was there, it was 164. So I'll just take it for maybe 180, 185. The school departments get more than half, about 56% of that budget. So any municipality, the majority of money goes to the school district, and what's left goes to to run the city, the highway, whatever is left. So if we could collaborate with other communities and cut that cost for the municipality, and I'm not saying but maybe reduce it by 15 or 20%. I think it's a win. And what do you want to collaborate on? That's the question, and how do the cities and towns go about it? So I think there should be some type of committee, study this, and that's the only way we're going to be able to save money when it comes to education.
Well, and when you look at some of the large city school districts across this country, you've got one city with one school district having more students than the state of Rhode Island. It's the overlap and the duplication is incredible, as well as you've got municipalities, each with their own curriculums, each with their own curriculum costs. It's completely balkanized. And unfortunately, the results are not great. One has to question, number one, given the financial situation. Number two, given the fact that I don't know if the schools can get much worse, particularly in the case of Providence, it strikes me that we can only improve. Your thoughts as an educator now during this period of crisis where students are learning from home. I realize the stats are still out on that, but what's your initial impression? I
had to, all the faculty at CCRI had to, I can just tell you my own experience. We had to stop dead in our tracks, and as we, teaching in the classroom, lecturing, and we had to literally reconfigure our whole way of lesson plan to the computer, and fortunately, I was lucky that I did take seminars and courses on the use of Blackboard and Zoom and Launchpad. So I was, I had some background, but some other professors had to just learn right as they were teaching, which is quite difficult. As I can say this, that the kids, I think, are more in tune learning from computers. However, it takes much more time to prepare and to critique their material they send to you on the computer. So it's more time consuming. However, maybe the more you use it, you can perfect that and cut the. That's my experience this semester.
So let's flash forward to that time pre-COVID, before this hit. And I guess we really need to look at Cranston in two separate perspectives. Number one, the administration leading up to the time when COVID hit, and now post-COVID. What are your thoughts in terms of the progress of the city over the past administration? We're looking at historical change now. The current mayor, after being serving for a long period of time, is going to be term limited. What is his legacy, and what is the legacy of that administration, in your thoughts?
Mayor Fung had some very good positives, and I think he had some setbacks. And I think Mayor Fung, he tries hard, he's successful, he means well. But I think Mayor Fung really was a poor judge of character on some issues. Take the police scandal, for example. We had a police chief that was literally acting like a gangster, basically, using the power of a chief and intimidating citizens, and there was just so much going on there. And we had to call the state police to come and run our police department. I can only tell you a few instances that I know. For example, I'll give you a case in point. We have a personnel director. Personnel director administers tests, and the police department has a written test, which is worth 60%, and then an oral test that's worth 40%. The chief and his hierarchy, who wanted to promote their friends from sergeants to lieutenants, or to lieutenants to captains, were intimidating the personnel director to allow her to turn over the written scores in order for their friends to do better on the oral. So they would know the score, and they could kind of fudge the oral in order for their candidate to get a very good mark on the test, if we get a promotion. And certain officers, there's a few, I don't want to name names, but who were, distinguished officers, they weren't getting the promotion because they were submarined during the oral, even if they had a high test score. And that's just one case in point what was going on. And if you ever read that state police report, there's numerous incidences. So Mr. Stikos and I stood up against a police department that was rogue, and was if you voted against something, they targeted you. As my district, they lambasted with parking tickets overnight. There was like 65 in mine, and Steve had like 69. And council people that supported their agenda, of course, didn't get a ticket written in their ward. So they were playing the game that way. And fortunately, there were good people at the state police that were very helpful, came in, and a number of the bad cops had to resign, which is a good thing. We have a very good chief now, former member of the state police, Mr. Winquest, and his administrative staff is top notch, and it's much better. But they were working, around 212, 213, like the Gestapo here in Cranston.
Wow. And of course, as you mentioned, they made national news because at the same time that the mayor was running to be governor, the state police actually had to come in and assume control of the police in the police function in the town.
Lieutenant Colonel Barry came, a few others. Very good. Captain Monahan did a great job. Mm-hmm. Respect them immensely. And that they stayed here for about, I think, a year and a half to get things out here. It wasn't easy. And I gave you one example of many things that were going on in Cranston. So if you are the commander in chief of the city, do you turn the blind eye? Do you know those things are going to? I mean, that's the issue. So, like I said, he had some great points and some other points that he had a rogue police department. Believe me when I tell you.
Yeah, and it's of course the question always, what's worse, that he knew or didn't know, and that that harkens back to many administrations at many levels in this country. Let's talk about taxes in Cranston. You've had at one point in time, going back to the pre-Laffey administration, the town was literally on death's door financially, largely because of management issues. Mr. Laffey is either fairly or unfairly, depending on your perspective, given credit for quote unquote, revitalizing. Is that a fair statement? Where do after 4+ years after the years of this administration, where do you think taxes are relative? And again, I'm talking pre-COVID, because the next part of the conversation will be everything's off the table, as we said, but we have to make a comment on normal operations relative to the rest of Rhode Island. Where do you think Cranston is fiscally?
I'll answer this in a little history first. I think Steve Laffey, I believe, gave a supplemental tax. So he gave a couple of tax increases to kind of balance the budget on the previous administration. When I was elected, it was a terrible, terrible year. It was 2008, 2009. It was kind of a recession year, if you remember that.
Yep,
you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And we had to make some tough choices. And fortunately, we didn't have to reset because many of the unions came to the table, and especially the Cranston Fire Department. I have to commend them, and they literally gave up quite a bit, as the police did, as the Teamsters did, and so they kind of renegotiated. And I have to give them a lot of credit because they got us through that dark period. In my 10 years, I think they only raised taxes twice in my 10 years there. So I was pretty good fiscally. That council was pretty good fiscally. Now, to answer more currently, the mayor just had a tax increase, I think, in 2019, and then it was unanimous. Every council member voted for the tax increase. I think we're now taxed about $22 on 1,000. I think, or roughly around that. I can look that up. It's roughly around that. But you're absolutely right, because with this covert and the $800 million, there's not going to be a lot of revenue sharing from the state. As you're well aware, the prisons are in Cranston, so we get what's called pilot money, which is payment in lieu of taxes, because to run ACI and so on and so forth. And I can't see that money coming either. So the next mayor is going to have to make some hard choices, whatever that is, whatever those choices are. I think there are two in the Republican Party running, Mike Farina, who is the council president now, and a second-term council citywide individual named Ken Hopkins. They're on the Republican side. And on the Democrat side is Steve Stikos, who is been on the council. I think this is his 5th term, and as you're well aware, he helped me, and he and I, combated the corrupt police department. So Steve was right there with me, and we were able to overcome that. And I believe Steve is going to have a primary with a former councilwoman named Maria Bucci. So it's going to be an interesting election here in November of 2020 in Cranston.
Yeah, it's astonishing, the timing, a complete turnover, if you will, of the heads of city government. You've got a real prospect that the state legislature, who have yet to really address what's happening to the state financially. It's astonishing how they've, for at least up until about a week or so ago, largely abdicated the role they have in managing expenditures, as is the nature of the legislative branch of government in any government. You've got a real chance that the hometown hero, if you will, Speaker Mattiello, is facing serious challenges, which may have been staved off, ironically, by going into the disaster footing that we're in right now. There was the wolves, as they say, were at the door. And by the way, this is my comment, not yours. If there is a politician who seems to be made of Velcro, who just manages, or I should say Teflon, manages to, wow, holy cow, he manages. Houdini's got nothing on him. I'll just say that. But
the speaker, I got to give the speaker, is fiscally conservative, and the speaker did come to bat with Pawtucket. I mean, they wanted to have a major, loan again, the bond rating and so on. So, and the speaker fought that, and I think because he fought that, he fought a lot of big special interests, believe them. And so the speaker can, he's got some backbone there. Mm-hmm. Yes, he's up against a tough candidate. I think he's going to be up against Mayor Fung's wife. And, when you're the incumbent mayor, you have a lot of money and a lot of foot soldiers at your disposal. So there's going to be a very interesting race, I would say.
Right. What you've talked about recently.
But just one thing on taxes.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, Cranston raised the taxes last year, and with the dismal outlook with the economy, I mean, what's going to happen? Do we raise them again? I mean, that's ridiculous. So we're going to have to look at, furloughs, or we're going to have to look at downsizing somewhere. It's going to be hard choices for the council. And I think you're going to need council people who are very experienced, like Paul Archetto, who can handle these things. You don't want a novice who just come out of nowhere, get elected, and just don't have a clue, because these are serious times, and you really need to make some hard choices. I've worked on many, many budgets, state budgets, school committee budgets, 10 years of city council budgets. So, and I wouldn't like to have a tax increase. I'll be quite honest. If elected, if we can do without one, I'll certainly try to do that.
And you make a great point. Very often, city council races are a sort of a stepping stone for a number of politicians who are looking to make a splash or looking to campaign on social issues or big, quote unquote, big picture issues. We couldn't be further from the case right now, could we? What's necessary, it's not even a question of wanting, but what is necessary right now are folks with institutional experience, institutional knowledge, a clear understanding of how their respective cities work. And that's why I say that I believe the governor now, that the immediate medical crisis seems to be waning somewhat. And I'll use the argument somewhat. That's another conversation. But in light of that, isn't it more important for towns to get down to the brass tacks, as they say, to stick to their knitting? I got all the cliches in the book, buddy. But it's the town that knows how they need to manage themselves. Is it more appropriate for the town to take the control at the local level, as opposed to having these creative geniuses at the state level who their idea of Cranston is basically going down and going down a New York system or heading over to Garden City? How important is local control right now?
I agree with you. I think local control is the most important, because we're the people in the trenches. We're the people who really know what the situation is on the front line. So I agree with you, local control. However, let me say this. I think the governor made a lot of good choices. I think she's done a great job handling this. She's under a lot of pressure. It's a 24-hour day, 7 days a week job, and I think Governor Armando's done an excellent job. However, if I was to have one minor criticism, is I think many of the people around her, many of her advisors, are not Rhode Islanders. I mean, she's hired a lot of people from out of state who really don't have a clue on how Rhode Island works, its operations. And I'll give you a case in point. And this is going back maybe a couple of years, maybe 3 years, and I'll never forget this. I think she hired someone from California to be her tourism director. Mm-hmm. It was a woman. And the woman was asked point blank by a reporter. I remember the reporter's name.
I believe it was Gene Valicente.
Right, I think it was Gene. And Gene asked her, what do you think of the Gatsby Day Parade? Would you like to make any changes to it, like to shorten it, or whatever? And her answer was, what's the Gatsby Day Parade? That was her answer, which really struck me, put chills down my spine, because when you have these people from California, Texas, wherever, they have no clue on what's going on here in Rhode Island. They have no identity to the place, no feeling for the. It's just their paycheck, and I'm a genius. I've got 5 degrees. I'm a PhD, and that's it. So, and that's my only criticism, I guess. But under these circumstances, I think the government's done an excellent job, and I commend her for what she's done. But if I had any advice, for the governor, hire people from here, from our hometowns, who really know how Rhode Island operates, and get things done, and know which buttons to press in order to get results.
Tough question for you, kind of a curveball here. Do you think that the towns, particularly the big ones, the Warwick, Rhode Island is made up of small neighborhoods within big towns. Should the towns really be having more of a role in determining how things are reopened in their community as opposed to the state level?
That's a tough call, Pat. I think from the president's point of view, he allowed the governors to decide when to open things up, as you're well aware. So what you're asking, should the governors allow the mayors to now decide when to open their institutions up? And, and that's basically, from the personality of who the governor is. Some governors probably would say yes, and other governors who want more control would say no, I'm the governor. Uh-huh. What's the right their cities, especially the big cities, especially Providence, Warwick, Cranston.
Right.
I think they need a bit more flexibility. That would be my recommendation.
Right. So more of a partnership, a working partnership, where when I speak to you and we talk from time to time, and when I speak to you, you've got Cranston in your blood. It's part of your DNA. And
Cranston graduate.
Yep.
Cranston East graduate and homeschool Providence College. I'm born and raised Cranston, Rhode Island. That's my heart and soul, man.
No, and you know what? That's what makes communities in a place where Rhode Island special, because you've got This is as old school as it gets. You've got investments by people over generations, by families who have raised their children here, are part of the community, have worked here, played here, and then kept their family here. So who better to really make that the hard decisions? Who understands, who's part of that heart and soul of a community, than individual mayors and their town councils? I'm personally, and I'm a huge believer in local government. You guys know what's best. You know where the money's got to come from, and ultimately, by the time all these states and federal types are done, you're the ones left holding the bag. You have to make the hard decisions. I want to end with this though. Just to change subject one more point. Mm-hmm. And as far as the mayor, and then again, I think you're well aware that certain corporations or certain major companies have more of an influence over elected officials and others. Mm-hmm. And that certain mega companies, corporations, the zoning board is everything. You know that, right? Absolutely.
And the Capianaro Corporation, which is worth over $50 million, and mayor getting
free office space,
$3,000 a week apartment for $500 a week apartment, things like that. Okay, things like that. But just so you know, something that's not on that resume. On 2 occasions before a zoning board vote, emissaries from that mega corporation slipped me a $500 check, which I returned immediately. Mm-hmm. Second one I returned with a, the certified mail.
Right.
Certified mail made a copy. So these are things, people don't realize that, zoning boards are very important, city council, and these mega companies want their way at all costs, whether it's damage to the environment, whether it's damage to traffic flow, whatever it is. But just so you know, I took on the Capianaro Corporation. Just want you to know that.
No, absolutely. And because you're right, they alone have had a significant impact on what Cranston looks like right now, and there is a great deal of frustration. Now, I'm not a resident of Cranston, but some of my best friends live there, and there's a lot of frustration about the direction of the community in terms of traffic, in terms of retail presence. It's the question has always been, how do you balance the future of a city? Is the city for out of town, out of state investors to simply profit from as they parachuting companies, or how do you balance the interests of the people who've been there for, in your case, generations?
Yes, good point.
It's.
I do have somewhere to go to eat. It's 7:45.
Okay. So, see, that's the thing. This is like one of our phone conversations. You and I could talk probably for
45 minutes. I think it was a great job. Thank you for the time. I enjoyed every minute of it, and we'll have to do this again sometime closer to the election. How's that, Pat?
I want you to feel like you can call in anytime an issue comes up. I'll leave you with this thought. We're going to be going through troubling times. A lot of tough decisions are going to have to be made. We're at a point where those decisions really need to be made, I believe, in large part by the people who are about to be elected, not so much on the way out the door from the people who are leaving. That's another conversation. So I look forward to your continued input as someone who, through a lifetime of public service, knows the city intimately, and Cranston is a critically important community in this state's future. So congratulations on running, and I look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you so much, my friend. Keep in touch. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right,
Bye-bye
buddy. That was Paul Archetto. He is running for the, well, first of all, let's go over the resume again. Cranston School Committee, Cranston State Legislator. Someone who's been intimately involved in the conduct, the affairs, the life of the city of Cranston for an entire generation. We're going to take a quick break right now. We're going to be back in a few minutes with a national production of something called An Hour with the Candidates. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network here at thecoalitionradionetwork.com. Facebook.com/Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes.